Hey everybody, so this Sony A80K settings video is quite delayed from what I originally intended, but alas, I'm finally catching up on my backlog of videos that I needed to get done, so here we are. So I'm going to start by showing some things to do preliminarily before doing the actual settings, just to make sure everything with the TV is set up properly, and then from there we'll go into the actual settings that I would recommend you use. The first step is purely optional, but if you do it, it will unlock some additional picture setting modes or presets that will make this a little bit easier to have different options. So if you go into apps and then you go down to search and you search for Calman for Bravia, CALMAN for Bravia, you get that app. You enable it, and then you just go on your phone and connect to the IP address that would be shown in the top right corner. I have a video previously on how to do this that will unlock additional picture modes called Custom for Pro 1 and Custom for Pro 2. Once you do that, we're going to go into your HDMI signal format and make sure all these are set to your devices. So I did cover this before, but we'll go over it real quick. For port 3, assuming that that is being used for your audio, you generally want to set that to either enhanced or enhanced Dolby Vision, and then port 4 is going to depend on if you have a console, and if it's a VRR capable console, then you would set it to VRR if you want that, or if you don't want to be locked into game mode, then you just set it to enhanced. Going into the speakers real quick, here's where you can change if you have external speakers. Here's where you enable eARC. And then also, if you do enable eARC, I suggest going down and turning pass-through mode to auto as well. Alright, once you get past all of that, then we're going to go to the pixel shift option. So I suggest turning this off. Some people will like to have this on, but you do lose some resolution when this is on. So I definitely would say turn off pixel shift. It really doesn't do much to help with image retention. And then if you ever need a panel refresh, that's where the option is. So now let's go into how to actually start applying your settings. It's a little bit tricky with Sony. So the first thing you want to do is go to your HDMI ports, and you will have to do this individually for every HDMI port that you use. Kind of showing the actual settings here, but I will put a chart at the end with the actual numbers and values that you should be putting in. This is more just demonstrating where all the settings are and what some of them do. Right now it's in SDR and it's in custom mode. And if you were to use Custom for Pro 1 and Pro 2, then you'd have to set those up as well if you wanted to have additional picture options for, say, nighttime, daytime, sports, and so on. I like to unlock those modes because then they line up where it would go Custom for Pro 1, Custom for Pro 2, and then you can arrange them in order of darkest to brightest, and it just makes it easier and faster when you are switching your picture modes. So the easiest way to go through and do all of this is if you have a game console, because you'll be able to keep it in movie modes and switch to game modes, do it all at once, and then you can switch from one HDMI to another and do the entire TV that way, assuming you're going to be using more than one port, but if not, you can just do one and be done. And while I will make recommendations for the processing features, these are purely going to be up to you as well and your preferences. So with motion, for example, the smoothness is going to adjust how smooth the image is, but that also increases soap opera effect. And then clearness is the black frame insertion, which will not only darken the image but also cause flickering. Cinemotion is going to depend on the source and type of content that you are using. However, I generally would just recommend low for it, as there's less issues using low than turning it off, which can affect, like if your source is 60 Hz or putting it to high, which can cause frame skipping or stutters. Something else to keep in mind is any of the processing settings that you apply will be the same in the same picture mode from SDR to HDR. So if you do your settings in SDR, as soon as the TV goes into HDR, all it's going to do is turn the peak luminance up to high and turn the brightness up to max if it's not already, and set the gamma to 0 where it should be. It just affects the brightness. Everything else will be the same between SDR and HDR, so if you wanted to have different processing settings in HDR, then you would need an additional or a separate picture mode. This is where unlocking those pro modes can make it a bit easier to set everything up how you like it. Alright, and then for setting up the actual Xbox and PlayStation, you're going to target 0 for your black on both, and then around 800 nits on the PlayStation and 800 even on the Xbox. So you can pull both triggers and bumpers on the Xbox to get the menu where it tells you, and on the PlayStation that just means going all the way down on the white pages and then counting 14 clicks up. It does not matter what the directions say for the HDR game calibration menu on the Xbox or the system calibration on the PS5. Just set it to 800 on the Xbox and 14 clicks on the PS5. Make sure your black is turned all the way down to 0, and that's it. And then for games that don't use this and they have built-in sliders in the game, if it gives a number value, just set it to 800 nits. Alright, the other thing that you need to know is with the built-in apps, if you use them, there are two styles of apps. So the first, you'll need to go into like Netflix or something. I generally would recommend Netflix because it's also Dolby Vision. But on the top left where it says Apps Video, that's one style of the apps. The other one would just say apps without the video. So that's like, I think ESPN is an apps, not video. So all of your settings would have to be done for these. Consider them two different sources. So using Netflix or another app that uses Dolby Vision, you need to start playing the Dolby Vision content in order for the Dolby Vision menu to appear and for you to be able to adjust the Dolby Vision settings, of which the two primary that you will be looking at is Dolby Vision Dark and Dolby Vision Bright. And while Dark follows EOTF a little bit better than Bright when you apply the gradation preferred to Bright, there are other things with Dolby Vision Bright that is more accurate than Dark. So I generally more often will recommend people to use Dolby Vision Bright with the gradation preferred turned on with the A80K or any of the other Sony WRGB OLED models. Alright, so once you are done in Netflix playing content, when you're at the Netflix menu, that will put you back into SDR. So from here, you can set up all of your SDR modes. And it doesn't have to be Netflix. Again, it can be HBO Max or Disney. Those are the most popular ones that are going to be using Dolby Vision. Amazon Prime, for the most part, will be using HDR10, although there is some Dolby Vision content on there now. So once you're done with the apps video, if you are sitting here at the main menu, you'll see where it says apps up there. So again, you can do this from the main menu or load into another app that doesn't say video in parentheses and repeat the process again. Again, this is only if you're going to be using the built-in apps. Otherwise, you only have to worry about the HDMI ports if you have an external device. Alright, now you know how to apply the settings and the best way to do them. Let's start looking at the actual settings. So we're going to start with the custom column here, which is going to be set up for nighttime viewing. If you didn't unlock the Pro modes and you want to use the settings from them, that's fine. All three of these modes are basically the same. They're just different labels. So starting with custom, the brightness, we're going to set between 35 and 50. That's going to depend on how comfortable you are viewing the TV at night. Contrast stays at 90, gamma at -1. When the TV goes into HDR, then the tone mapping option will be there, and it would be on gradation preferred. Black level stays at 50. Black adjust and contrast enhancer stays off. Peak luminance, you want to keep this low as possible in SDR, and it has to be on high for HDR. The reason you keep that low as possible in SDR is it will increase the ABL aggressiveness as you increase peak luminance. Color menu should be left alone. Clarity, sharpness needs to stay at 50, that's the neutral value. Reality creation, I would suggest just putting it on auto. The random and digital noise reductions, either off, low, or auto, entirely up to you. Generally find most people are fine with it on auto. Smooth gradation, recommend low. And then motion settings, entirely up to you. Just know that the higher you increase smoothness, the more soap opera effect you get. And if you turn clearness from low to high, you're going to cut your brightness down a lot, and it's going to introduce flicker from the black frame insertion. And as I mentioned earlier, the Cinemotion setting on low will be your safest bet, and then everything below those menus should just stay at the default and auto. Now for custom for Pro 1, if you did unlock these modes, I would set this up as a general use day mode. So everything basically the same, except we're going to just put the brightness at 50 and the peak luminance at medium. And then for Pro 2, that's going to be our max brightness mode. Generally, if you have bright lights coming in the room or hitting the screen, or some people like to use this as a dedicated sports setup, and then you can change the motion settings to have more smoothness on this mode for sports. That's what it would be for. So just max brightness, put the peak luminance on high, and then gamma put to 0, everything else the same unless you wanted different motion settings for sports. Then in game mode, we're pretty much going to duplicate our Pro 1 here, although gamma you can choose if you want 0 or -1. And then the peak luminance, I recommend keeping it at medium, as if you go to high, it won't actually be very bright because it will dim down more if it's in high. Also, a lot of the processing features will not be available in game mode. So then in Dolby Vision, as I mentioned earlier on this TV, I would recommend you use bright with the gradation preferred turned on for the tone mapping, and then everything else you pretty much leave alone except for your motion settings, and smooth gradation again I would just recommend put on low. So once you've gone through and applied all of this to all of your sources or inputs that you use, then you're done and you pretty much don't need to mess with it anymore, except just if you are going to switch between your different night, day, and very bright modes, but you can easily do that from the menu that pops up from the bottom of the screen instead of going into the actual settings menu. So that's all. Thank you all for watching. I really hope this helps you out, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Thanks.